Hello and welcome to the Expat Reality Podcast. I'm your host, Annie.
And I'm your host, Steve.
And in this podcast, we're going to explore the reality of living life as an expat in Australia and what it really means to feel like you belong.
Join us as we uncover the challenges and opportunities that expat life presents on the search for settled.
With our stories, tips and interviews, see us as your two friends to help you navigate expat life abroad. Just to let you know, this video podcast series is brought to you by the team at Auric Migration and Mobility. Now, Auric have helped us personally with my visa process to Australia, and we only know too well how difficult the entire process can be if you're doing it by yourself. They have also helped hundreds of our followers, and they're offering our listeners an initial assessment for free. Email them your visa situation, questions or concerns, and they will get back to you at no extra cost. Simply mention the Expat Reality Podcast when you email them at migration@auric.com. Auric is spelled A-U-R-E-C. So that's migration@auric.com. Hi everyone, before we get started today, we'd just like to say, please can you like and subscribe our podcast? This is a really new podcast. We're only on our episode 15 right now. So if you can like and subscribe, you're going to help us keep doing more and more of these podcast episodes.
That's right. Leave us a review. Tell everyone else how amazing we are. Just spread the word because it'll help other people find the podcast and it'll make everyone happy. So just give us a review, give us the thumbs up and the world will be a happier place.
All right, let's get into it. Welcome back to the Expat Reality Podcast. I'm your host, Annie.
And I'm your host, Steve.
I can't believe we're on episode 15. Steve, we made it all that way.
I know. Who would have thought it? I mean, we're at number 15 now. It's the big 15. Celebrationary round of applause. Very happy to make it here. Thanks to everyone who's been listening and following along with us. We've had fun up until this point, and we're going to have a lot more. I guarantee you that.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody, for sending in all your messages via Instagram. We really appreciate it. It just surprises us that people are actually listening, and hopefully we are providing some sort of reassurance and just some bit of love and comfort out there for anybody else who is on that expat journey.
That's right. Yeah, Annie's been telling me about some of the messages that people have been writing in. I mean, there seems to be a lot of people out there who are struggling to find their place in the world and really struggling to find, where they belong. I mean, everyone has this kind of feeling that they belong somewhere, but where is that?
Exactly. And that is what we're going to be talking about all today in today's podcast episode. So, the question is, can we truly settle as expats? It's a hard one. Some people say, yes, absolutely. Other people go, it's really hard. How do you manage between two different worlds? And we're also going to talk about how to find your place in Australia as well. Steve and I have been together for a very long time, and we have been constantly talking about this question forever, really, haven't we, about where on earth do we belong in this world? Now, last weekend, we just went back to an old town that we used to live in Australia, and it brought up so many emotions and such a huge conversation between ourselves in terms of where are we meant to be? So we thought it was only a right thing to do to really talk to you guys and let you know how we feel, and also give you some tips as well about, how you can have a life as an expat and how you can actually enjoy it as well. So yesterday I actually put it on our Instagram, The Londoner in Sydney, if you're not following us already. And I asked our audience and I said, is there anything you want us to bring up on today's episode? And we got a really good response, which we're going to talk about today, but also I really want to start off this episode with a quote that someone sent us. And as soon as I read it this morning, I read it to you, Steve, didn't I? And you were like, wow.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way.
Okay, I'm going to read it out to you guys, and this is how it goes. The word routine is dismissed from your vocabulary to make sense for an ever-rising adrenaline thrill ride. New places, new habits, new challenges, new people. Starting anew should terrify you, but it's unusually addictive. And there's no turning back. Now you know what it means to give up comfort, what starting from scratch and marveling at the world every day feels like. And it being such a huge, endless world, how could you choose not to keep traveling and discovering it? I mean,
everything about that it spoke to me. And I think it's just one of those things where it's just the world is so amazing. I mean, how could you not want to continue discovering more of it? Because there's so much to learn and so much to see and understand and figure out who you are and who people are and who the world is and what's going on in this crazy planet. There's just so many questions.
Absolutely. And I think what I love about that quote more than anything is that it brings actually two different worlds together. It brings the world of an expat and it also brings the world of a traveler as well, which is what we both are essentially. So I really want to talk today to you about, what it feels like to be an expat, but also from Steve's point of view as well. It's not only about feeling like you can fit into Australian life, but how you can feel like you can fit into everyday life, no matter where you are, from someone who has traveled a lot around the world. But on the topic of expats, we must remind ourselves here that not all expats are in the same boat. And what I mean by that is, you might have some expats out there like myself, for example, who specifically moved to Australia because I met Steve. Other expats might be moving over because they're not particularly happy with their lives in their home countries. I mean, the circumstances could be an endless list really as to where we are. We're going to talk about our personal experience today. And obviously we're going to give you a few tips as well about, after being an expat for 11 years, this is just some of the things that I've learned about, how to live in between different worlds as well.
Yeah, I mean, and, whilst Annie's covering the expat side, I think travel changes you fundamentally. And I think I've done a fair bit of travel in my time and seen a whole bunch of places that have really had a huge impact on me and shaped my view of the world. And I think that ultimately, again, it changes the way you feel about where you are now and where you want to be in the future. So it's a really cool thing to dig down and explore and really pull out these things that are really kind of shaping our lives. I think they're really ripe for the picking.
I just want to take it back to what it was like when I was growing up because, I never even thought about travel at all. It didn't even cross my mind. And I grew up in a small area where, the majority of my family still live in that same town as well, where I grew up in. And you know what? I do sometimes feel very, very envious of that, in a sense of that sort of, I wish I hadn't have got into this sort of unknown life of being an expat. Sometimes it would have been better if I just didn't know what that was like.
But hang on, you can't sort of say, well, look, maybe, there's kind of happiness in, in sort of, not understanding things or, is that how you feel, honestly? Do you think?
Well, sometimes I do, yeah, because I just feel like, gosh, wouldn't it just be great if I could have just just decided to live a sort of not a conformed lifestyle, but just what society's telling us that, after university, I just ended up buying a house and settled down and did that whole thing and, was very I don't know, just the way I feel like most people are. But are most people, do they feel like that? I don't know. I feel like society is making me feel like I'm not the same as everybody else. I don't think the same as everybody else in terms of what I want my life to look like. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think that's why where Annie and I click so well together is because we do both feel that same way. And I think, society does place this kind of expectation and it kind of starts at an early age and you don't really sort of notice it's there. It's kind of just in the background and kind of all the movies we watch and kind of the stories we tell each other, the people you meet as growing up and all that sort of thing. And your group of friends that surround you all are all doing something. So, well, that's just normal, right? The stuff that I read about in the newspaper, that's just normal, right? And it's kind of this, it just goes on and on that you just build this view of the world based on what you're seeing around you. And I think stepping back for a moment and questioning that and saying, yeah, I'm not sure that's the full story. I want to see what other flavors there are in the ice cream shop, So I think that's the beauty of travel, really. And I think it does open the world up and you go to the ice cream shop and you realize there's a whole bunch of different flavors. Everyone's doing everything differently. There's no kind of rigid square everyone needs to fit into. And I think then the conflict comes about, though, when you try to perhaps go back and then you realize that the flavor you used to like it. Oh, I used to like the chocolate. And all of a sudden, but I've tasted the strawberry now. what am I going to do? I kind of like both, but I can't eat them at the same time because it messes everything up. And it's totally an ice cream analogy, and that's where it all is. It's all down to the ice cream flavors.
I just want to eat ice cream now.
I just want to eat ice cream too.
But, on that topic as well, one thing I'm sure a lot of people probably relate to is the fact that, when you become an expat, especially when you're younger and you're in your 20s like I was, and you take yourself outside of that mold that you've been brought up in, and when you move, you're kind of starting all over again, while your friends are continuing on that journey of their careers, their relationships. Before you know it, everybody around you is getting married or having kids. And yet there's me on the other side of the world going, oh, I've kind of gone back in my career. This is just how it was for me. I had to go back in my career and kind of start all over again. And it took me a while to build that all up. And yet I'm thinking, like everyone's moved on and they're doing everything that I probably should have been doing. And yet I've always kind of feel like I'm on catch up.
Yeah, look, I totally feel the same way. I mean, all my friends back home and back in Sydney, they're all doing they all moved on while I travelled, and I would come back to Sydney for a while, save up some money, do the same sort of job that I'd been doing before. And then I'd go away and then I'd come back again. I'd do the same sort of job. There was no kind of progression because you never really had that opportunity. I never had that opportunity to be in a role for long enough to say, start climbing the ladder. Things are different now and that's great, but it's kind of at that time in my life, through the 20s and 30s and things were different. And I think the world was different too though. So that's everything's within the frame of the world we're in at the time. We're all shaped by this. And I think that, as you sort of progress through life, your values change as well. And hence we are where we are today, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for me, I had this weird sort of calling for Australia. As I've said before in previous episodes, maybe that was just due to growing up watching those sort of Australian soaps like Home and Away and Neighbours, Heartbreak High. Can't forget that one. Maybe it's just that sort of drilled into me and I thought, wow, that would be amazing to live there. And so I kind of always had this thing after university where I was like, I'm going to go to Australia and I'm going to travel a bit of the world. And after that first year, I mean, we're talking back to like 2006 here, that when I did return to London, things just weren't the same for me anymore. And so, I went into that sort of life of getting a career and doing the 9 to 5. And it was like, oh, I've just had this like amazing experience for a year and travel around the world. And now I'm doing a 9 to 5 job. And is this what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life? And where are those cool people that I met and you're sharing travel experiences with? Whereas now I'm sort of talking with coworkers where we're just talking about work stuff that kind of isn't on that same level at all. And like, I found that really hard to sort of understand really and be okay with.
That's one of the things I had the most difficulty with is like, sort of reconciling those two worlds of kind of making some of the most deepest sort of friendships that you would ever have in the space of 2 weeks that you never really had like back home to that sort of degree. And it's kind of hanging on the back of a chicken bus and some random event happens that changes your life and, just meeting all these really amazing people and experiencing different things and different ideas and all these new things happening in your life. And then all of a sudden you go back to where you are back home and it's just like this monotony and it's just this repetition and everything. I could just never really find my way into that. And I sort of always was thinking all in the back of my mind thinking, I want to be back on the chicken bus, hanging out, exploring new places and seeing new things. And it just didn't really like click in my mind that, I should just, follow what everyone else is doing and just, go and, I don't know, just do the whole Joneses thing. It just wasn't my deal. So.
And so do you want to take it back a little bit, Steve, in terms of, do you want to like tell everybody, why did your sort of travel adventures start? Like what made you want to do it?
Yeah, I think really like deep down inside, again, going back to that thing is I always felt this kind of real thirst and to really find out what was going on. Like nothing kind of made sense to me. It's like, why is the world this way? I kept on thinking, why aren't people better to each other? Like that was the main question I had in mind and I just couldn't figure it out. I was like, is it all about, something I don't know about? Is it, is it money or is it something else? Or is it just people just built a weird way? Like why is the world fundamentally this way? Like, what made it this way? And I think that's what really made me want to start traveling to different countries and then understanding different ways of doing things. And then I think once you gain that perspective, then it gives you this kind of insight into the way things are operating in your own country that, perhaps isn't so visible when you're in it. It's a bit like a fish swimming in water. It's like you don't really see what you're swimming in until you're kind of out of the fishbowl, I guess. So maybe it's a bit like that. But anyway, so that was how it all started. And then I did a couple of really long, like round the world trips or over this period of time. And I was backwards and forwards and traveling around and, all over South America and Africa and Asia, Africa with Annie, and Asia and South America and Europe, and I lived in Holland for a little bit, lived in the UK for a little bit as well. So I had that kind of connection as well. That's kind of rang with Annie and I. We kind of knew that, the cool things to do in London we could talk about and things like that. So that kind of helped when I was doing the tuning, so to speak. The tuning, it was a new tune. Anyway, so anyway, so I think that was the whole reason is I just had this kind of real desire. I think I was kind of I wasn't happy with this mundane routine. Me and routine just were not two things that ever should, be in the same place. So I always need to have something that's kind of just captivating me somewhere in some way to keep moving without going completely mad. If that makes sense, maybe someone else feels the same way.
And I think, with the experiences that we have experienced in a sense around the world, for both of us, I feel like we definitely feel the most at home when we do travel. And maybe that is just because we're way more open to meeting people. We feel like we're the best versions of ourselves. We're so excited to see new places. And that's why, we started London and Sydney, the travel site, was to share all these amazing places to visit around Australia. Because, if you do pay attention to our Instagram, the London and Sydney, you'll see most weekends we are always out exploring new places. And we're like, we've got to go and see somewhere new because that excitement and thrill and adventure is just is so addictive, like it said in that quote. Since COVID, it feels like there's probably quite a lot of people in the same boat as us right now in terms of when you start to work remotely. At the beginning, it was amazing. So it was like, wow, I've got so much more time on my hands now. I don't have to commute every day or deal with that. But as time goes on, when you're working in your house all day, every day, like we are literally the only people we see, and our dog and our neighbours and maybe the people we see on our dog walks. But apart from that, we don't really see other people unless we're on Zoom calls with work. And after a time, that just become quite a lot to handle. And I feel like maybe there's quite a lot of people, and I will put my hand up and say this, that you do become almost a little bit agoraphobic in a sense of being around new people. And that's sort of what's happened to us on Sunshine Coast. Now, I have joined various fitness groups around, but I just never found my people. And there's like a group I go to on a weekend that's really, really beautiful, and I love that. It's one of my favourite things to do here. But in terms of making those really close connections, actually really hard.
I think things feel different to what they were in the past. And I mean, not only pre-COVID, but I think like as we were when we were younger and we were traveling, friendships just happened. They just kind of they're just something you didn't have to think about. It just kind of just appeared. And I think that's something as you get older is less of a thing. Like it doesn't just appear. People go off, they have kids and they go and do their thing, or they're focused on their work, or, there's all these different things that kind of take people in different directions other than kind of, I think we're younger. You know what brings people together more than anything? Parties. Parties bring people together, and people just don't do enough of it anymore.
Well, it's just not a thing anymore, is it? People just don't want to get drunk.
People don't party like they used to. I think that's a sad thing.
We don't party like we used to.
We definitely don't party like we used to. If we did, I don't know if I'd still be here, to be honest.
I think we're a bit too old now, aren't we, trying to do it. But yeah, and we get asked this question a lot. How do you make friends in 30s? I mean, it doesn't really matter how old you are, really. I think it in general is pretty hard these days to make friends. Obviously, the more active you are, the more sociable you are, it's going to be easier. The episode we did with Emma, which we'll link below in the notes, Emma, who was traveling around a van with her family and now is in Margaret River, she had a great point to say. Her reality was to go and volunteer. And she said by volunteering, that was a really good way for her to make friends. Now, I would love to do that, but unfortunately, my work-life balance is not exactly where it should be. And so I seem to find work takes over a lot of my life right now, which I really do need to get a hold of and make more priorities to spend time with people.
Yeah. And, I guess that you have to like make that, the meeting people a priority in your life. Otherwise it kind of just doesn't really happen. And you have to almost like schedule in like time to go and be social, working from home especially. And I think, no matter where you are, it's just a super duper important thing for your mental health too.
Steve and I do have a bit of a reality of moving on after like probably 2 years, don't we?
Well, there's the 18 month each, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of 18 months seems to be at the moment, isn't it? But so it seems to be like, why are we still here? And on paper, Sunshine Coast is amazing. And I think it is one of the best, if not the best place to live in Australia. It's just about sort of connecting with people. And I think probably one of our downfalls here is not fitting in to a specific group in terms of, Sunny Coast is very much full of your 18 to 21-year-olds who are still living with mum and dad. You've got your families and you've got your oldies. That's pretty much it. Like, you're not really going to see that many other types of people here. So we're like, where do we fit in with our little dog? Is there like a couples with dog group? Like, I don't know.
But I mean, it ticks all the other boxes. I mean, you've got amazing beaches, friendly people, lots to do around the countryside. Everything's here at your fingertips. I mean, it does literally tick every box. So, and look, everyone's great. Like, don't be wrong. It's an awesome place to live. And I think though, like wherever you live, finding your people is super like important, like especially for us, wherever we go, it's like whereabouts are our people? And I think it's getting harder and harder to define our people. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if everyone else has this problem, but for me, like, I don't know. I just feel like I'm a mixture of like 20 different groups, and I don't know if I'd ever find a group that I'd feel like, oh, hey, this is my group. I kind of feel like I'm in the outer on all the groups, and kind of like you're that weird guy, And so that's just going to be me.
You're not
like,
weird.
So I'm happy with that. I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine.
You've
with
got
that.
a funny personality. He is pretty funny though.
That's that weird kind of odd guy.
You've been making me laugh all these years, Steve.
Well, if I was at least to do something right.
You're doing something right. But
I put the dishes away, and then I'll be in the good books.
Oh my God, what is it with men? Why can't, honestly, I'm just going to say this. Why can't men, i.e. Steve, I'll take that back. Why can't Steve load the dishwasher? I don't get it. Do not get it. Anyways, we're digressing here. But, that's it's a really good point about where to live in Australia, because trying to find your place, your people, someone sent us a message and they said a really good point here. Parents are aging back home. Do they move back? Currently living in Sydney. Now, everybody knows in Sydney, it's very, very hard to buy a place, especially if you're living in somewhere like the eastern suburbs. That's going to be crazy, crazy expensive. So then they're at a point now where they go, well, I want to buy my own house. I've got my children and everything. Am I really going to have to rent forever living in Sydney? Or am I going to have to move out of the city, not be around my circle of friends anymore? I'm going to move the kids out of the school. Do I move back home? We're going to have to start all over again. There's lots and lots of big decisions you need to make when deciding where to move, especially if you are planning on staying long term as well. There's just so many questions that really go on in it. When we feel most at home when we're traveling, you got to add the expat life on top of that. And so that sort of guilt of being away from your friends and family, but also friends and family making you feel like you need to conform to society as well and settle down and stay in one place can be really difficult to sort of juggle and to be okay with as well. And I do wonder, if you move away from home, do you still feel like you belong back home again? Because I remember when we moved back, that was a bit of an eye-opening experience for me, because I had always imagined just going back to the UK. And when we went back, I didn't really feel like I belonged there anymore. And I felt like I'd moved on. And I was just like, oh.
You've changed. The place has changed. And time has moved on. So it's like everything in that whole equation that you used to know of that was like kind of you running on, some sort of, path and everything is now completely changed. So I think when you try to rerun that same path, it's just never going to work. And, I think you've got a different set of expectations and different eyes. When you come back, you notice things you didn't notice before, like things that were like not a problem. And geez, I never noticed that, like, how like crazy irritating the garbage bins in England are, because they have this big, massive, like, garbage bins in the middle of the road. Like, why do you guys do that? Just put it at the back, you know? And so, look, I get it because the garbage trucks come along and they collect it and everything, right? It's just done differently. It drives me nuts because everyone comes in and throws all the rubbish out trying to, you know, see if there's any like valuable in there that might be a little treasure. So, you know, it's like that drives me a bit nuts. But other things like that, you think, well, that's just normal. You know, you don't even sort of see it. And I think when you're living somewhere, you're kind of blind to those things. And then when you go away and you come back, you're like, oh, wow, I see that with new eyes. And I think that's where the refreshing part of it comes about. So
your analogies today, Steve, are just so on point, aren't they?
Oh, yeah.
Garbage bins and ice creams.
Oh, yeah. It's a world of garbage bins and ice creams. That's what it is. Remember that?
I'm thinking more along the lines of living in Australia and, you know, becoming a sort of a different version of yourself and then going back and then realizing, oh, that version of myself might not fit into that world that I was once living in, and just feel like you have like two lives when you do become an expat as well. One follower did say to us that, you know, they can't stop thinking of the UK as their home and Australia being somewhere that they are simply just living in for right now. That sort of makes me question, at what point do we stop calling ourselves expats? Is it when you get your citizenship? Is it when you feel like you're settled? I mean, it's kind of an interesting topic.
Very good point. When is that point that you're no longer an expat? You're just a member of that, you know, society or you know, the country. You know? You're a citizen now. I'm no longer an expat. So
yeah, so
where is that point? But it has to be citizenship, surely. But then, you know, but then again, you're not really born here. So I guess you're never really like kind of. You're always on the outer wherever you go. It's kind of.
Speaking of everybody, next week, someone who's talking in this conversation today has got the citizenship ceremony.
Little round of applause for our Annabelle. She is actually going to become a Rigi Australian. Speaking of citizenships.
Speaking of 11 years in the waiting, I will finally become an Aussie citizen. Now, will I still call myself an expat?
That's a good question, will you?
You know what?
It'd be hard to do the Expat Reality Podcast as a
I think I always
citizen,
will. I think I'll always be British, really. Like, yeah. That's what I am.
We can change the name.
I've just got another passport. Hey.
Citizen Expat Podcast, does that go? No,
not really.
It doesn't really go.
But hey, you know, we asked our followers yesterday a question about, you know, are you happy as an expat? And it's not a question I've ever asked anybody before, but I was really thinking about, you know, this episode today, and I thought, wow, you know, as I was saying before, if I knew what was going to happen, how my life was going to turn out, would I have actually really wanted to go down that expat rabbit hole? Would I really want to put myself through this sort of grief, in a sense, that that I personally feel like I hold on to for a lot longer than I probably should do, in terms of, you know, being away and really not knowing where I meant to belong. But at the same time, if I didn't go, I wouldn't have met you, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, there is that whole question of, you know, you have friends and family, especially older people, older relatives. That's a huge bit. I totally get the whole guilt thing there. And, you know, even being at a distance from where my family are, I feel guilty being, you know, just halfway up the country. But imagine being in a completely different country. You're going to have that kind of feeling of, well, I should be looking after them. I should be taking care of them. I should be seeing them more. Am I valuing their relationship like I should be? There's this kind of expectation thing that's implicitly, you know, that's implicit there. So it's kind of, you know, it's tricky to reconcile. But I think really, if you're, you know, worried about that your parents or your relatives, they probably would just want the best for you, right? So I always kind of err on that side for myself. I mean, think whatever you like, I guess. But, you know, as long as you're making contact and seeing them at least sometimes, well then, you know, I think they'd be happy that you're happy, right?
Yeah. And it turned out 80% of our followers said that they are happy as being an expat, but 20% said no. And I don't really know what I was expecting to see, to be honest, but I'm kind of surprised 20% said no.
Yeah, well, you know, there's always going to be a few grumpies in the pack. I mean, not everyone's going to be happy chaps, and you know, some things don't work out as well as you thought, and you know, there is that kind of thing. I totally get it. I had a bit of a kind of a not so good time. I went to Holland actually. I was trying to do the whole expat thing there. I've got a little doggy down here that just really wants to play, but that's okay. I'll continue on. I actually lived in Holland for almost a year. I worked at a backpackers there, and as you can imagine what would happen at a Dutch backpackers, everything you can imagine is true. It was pretty crazy times. It was fun times. All I did was kind of hang around and make beds, and then, the rest of the time I was just off partying and all the rest of it. So look, it was good times, but I think I kind of really wanted to kind of make the best of Dutch life. I was applying for jobs and everything, and I wanted to work at this this big convention center. I was an audio-visual guy back then. I was right into that sort of scene. So I thought, oh, cool. I'll try and get some work there. And literally, time ticked on, and they wouldn't have me. And no one wanted to take me on. And I was like, what am I going to do? And I thought, I'll just take one last crack at this convention center. And lo and behold, they said, yeah, actually, we've just had a guy leave. Would you like to come in and we'll interview you? I was like, oh, brilliant. This is perfect. And, because, being an English speaker in Holland is tricky to get a job, full stop. So anyway, I went in there, I was like all happy, and the interview's going really well. We're talking about all these things, and eventually they go, oh, so how long is left on your visa? And I'm like, well, kind of been here like 8 months now. And they're like, oh, that's just no good. And so the whole thing just fell apart, and it didn't work out. So there is these things that just... sometimes things just don't work out, and that's okay. That's life.
I think you should have just lied. If you lied, you would have been fine.
Well, probably so. at the end of the day, no one would have really checked, and I could have just warned off, somewhere else. But at some point in time, who knows? You're thinking someone's going to check that passport at some point, and if they do and they find out that I'm there illegally, who knows what's going to happen. But
and so, it sort of brings you onto this topic of, how do you decide where to live in Australia as well? Most people think, oh, they'll just head to Sydney or Melbourne, or maybe Perth or Adelaide or Brisbane, or Darwin maybe if you're up for that, or regionally as well. And we've been lucky enough to live both regionally and in Sydney as well. So we're going to dive into what that actually looks like. But I remember when I first came to Sydney, and it was a bit of a culture shock because, I was used to living in London. A lot of friends lived in Shoreditch. I worked in radio. And then all I saw in Sydney were a lot of the cool people in Sydney were dressed like they were from The Only Way is Essex. And I was like, what? This is cool. And I was just like, oh, okay, that's really random.
There are a large number of people that can, conduct themselves like they're in a permanent job interview. I'm just putting it out there in Sydney. I feel like sometimes people can loosen up a bit,
Sometimes they do. Yeah, but, Sydney's a big city. So it's always going to be hard to sort of crack a lot of people there in terms of really making those friendships with Australians as well. So, but I think if you're coming over here, you've got to really think about what is it that you're actually looking for. Is it to replicate the life you had previously, live in another city, or is it to actually live a real proper Australian lifestyle? I remember when I did work in radio in Sydney, and one of the guys from London, he used to be like a celebrity reporter, and he's working on the same radio station as me, and he wasn't really into Sydney. He was like, I haven't moved here to live in another city. I've moved here to live a proper Australian lifestyle. And he ended up getting transferred up to the Gold Coast. Now, this is back before Gold Coast really did explode. This is going back at least 10 years ago. And I remember going up there with you, Steve, and we met him, and I was like, oh my God, what are you doing here? There's nothing here. It's like a random sort of Vegas style thing. I thought it was really random at the time.
Well, there's I think there's a lot going on in the Gold Coast.
No, there is now.
It's changed now. Yeah.
Now there is, yeah, definitely. But I just thought it was kind of interesting that he said back then, he was like, I want to literally live next to the beach, not have to pay a fortune to do that. This is going back at least 10 years ago, by the way. And that was his choice. That's what he wanted, was to have a proper experience of living in Australia. So, it's quite interesting to think about what it is that you really want and why you are moving here. So properly question that, because there are a lot of places to move to. There's not just the 5 main cities. Well, I think it's probably good just to sort of chat a bit more about us living regionally as well, because I've learned quite a lot from the regional experience, and also the pros and cons between living regional and in a city, because there are quite a lot in a way. So back in 2019, we actually went and did pet sitting up the coast for 6 months. Now, there is a site that we did use. It's called Aussie House Sitters. We still use them now, actually, for our own dog when we go away for a longer period of time. So it's good that we did it. We've done it both ways. So we've looked after pets, but now we get people to look after our dog as well. That's a really good site to use if you actually want to live rent-free. So we used Aussie House Sitters to do our pet sitting with. And we were really fortunate because we went up and down the coast for 6 months, and we said like 3 pet sits, all rent-free. We didn't have to pay any bills, nothing. It was like living in someone else's house and looking after a dog, which was a really great experience. But we learned a lot very quickly about regional living. Now, at the end of our pet sitting sort of stint, that's when we ended up in Agnes Water in Queensland, which is 5 hours north of Noosa, which is where we actually just went last weekend. So we ended up living there for nearly 2 years, and it was on paper and actually visually our most ideal place in the world. Like, we all sort of had this vision of us living in a really beautiful place next to the beach, really remote, away from everything. And that's what we got. We got that for 2 years. Now, lots of people did ask us on my Instagram in the last few days, like, why did you move away from there? Why did you move to Sunshine Coast for? Why did you not stay there? Because it looks really beautiful. And it really is. It is honestly the most beautiful beach town I've seen in Australia by a mile. Like, it's beautiful. The houses are all brand new. They're really cheap to live in. And
well, I wouldn't say they're cheap to live in, but they're cheaper than what you'd find in sort of most sort of capital cities anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, we got to a point there when we'd actually done everything we could around the area. So we scoped out all the islands nearby, because at the bottom of a southern Great Barrier Reef, which is really spectacular. We did all the hikes, everything we could do in the area we did. And it got to a point where we were like, well, if we want to do any more travel and write more for our site, we're going to have to travel at least like 4 hours really back to Sunshine Coast to cover any more sort of content, really. And for us, it was like, we don't want to spend every weekend going, right, what are we going to do this weekend? Go to the beach or go to the beach? It was like, yeah. So one thing to know about regional living is, firstly, everybody is so friendly, like so nice. When we went back to Agnes Water, everyone was like, hi. And we're like, oh, do I know you? And then we remembered that's just how everybody is, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, everyone is, very friendly, but there's also a lot of gossip going on. So everyone's like gossiping about, what Mrs. Jones is doing, and someone's gossiping about what, some other bloke's doing. And it all kind of ends up being this big gossip farm and whispers. There's lots of whispers.
Well, I think that's the thing in regional towns. Also, we've got to sort of bear in mind COVID as well, because we got there before COVID and it was a very different place. And then after COVID, we started to see how like different groups started to get formed. You had the vaxxers versus the anti-vaxxers, and you had the old locals versus the new locals. And you start to see a lot of people in the cities moving in, and then all the locals are like hating it. And then you've got to start to see a lot of the original locals are all being kicked out of their houses as well. So all of these sort of regional towns are all starting to change quite rapidly, aren't they?
They are, and that's a big thing. Things are changing rapidly. The demographics are changing, they're growing, all that sort of stuff. Regional Australia is definitely picking up. That said, living in Agnes Water, there's a lot of things that we didn't have that we do here. I mean, things like just going to the cinema, you think, oh, well, that's not so important, right? But when you're there, you think, oh, I just love the air-conditioned cinema, and sit there and watch a movie in the dark, and, stuff like that you begin to miss. And then, other things like not having to drive an hour and a half to go to some major shops is pretty important and definitely rates highly on your scale. Once you've lived regionally or sort of a bit more remotely, that then, you kind of realise how much you kind of do miss those things, even though it doesn't seem like a big deal when you're in a city or you are close to those. And I think just choice, like you end up just choosing, whatever's available, because you've only got like 3 fish and chip shops to choose from. So I guess it's fish and chips tonight, right?
But that's the thing. It's all these like little things that you don't realise that you really miss. And what I've heard is a lot of people don't last that long in regional towns because they do miss the city life, and they miss the buzz of the city and the access to, not just the shops and being able to go to Woolworths or just basic things. It's like entertainment, gigs, all these things that really make up your sort of social life and who you are. You suddenly don't have that because living in those sort of regional towns, a lot of it gets stripped right back as well. It's also, I think, really worth noting as well that after living in Queensland now for the last few years, I have heard, especially from the moving company that we used when we moved down Sunshine Coast, because I quizzed them massively, and they said a lot of people who move to Queensland end up moving back to New South Wales or Victoria because of the heat. And they don't like the heat.
It was pretty hot in Agnes Water, definitely hot. I mean, that's the other thing. You live regionally, especially if you live inland, like you have to really consider the temperatures, especially with things heating up, like as they are. We were told by people who were climate people that we stayed with.
It was in Mount Tamborine.
Tamborine, yeah. They were working at a university studying climatology, and they said, look, definitely stay where there are trees because that is a big deal. They will be more of a big deal as time goes on. So definitely something to consider. But look, I think there are so many pros and cons to consider. I mean, on one hand, you've got, in a regional town, you've got, more of a close-knit community. Everyone looks after each other. They help each other.
And you know everybody.
It's like that feeling of familiarity is really nice, just to walk down the street and say, hey, how you going? Or, and just feel like not everything's impersonal like it would be in a city. And you feel more connected to everything. And that's really, really nice. So definitely two different sides of the coin there for it. I find it really difficult to make the choice, but I think they're both really great. So
yeah, you know what? In 2019, when we first discovered Bellingen near Coffs Harbour, I always talk about it's probably one of my favourite towns, I think, in Australia. It's really beautiful, literally just 15 minutes away from the main highway, but it feels like a whole world away. Now, when you do go there, it's literally like one street, and you're like, "What is this? It like, what's the big deal about this town?" But that was the first time when we went to the pub and we ended up like hanging out with loads of locals, like we would do really in England, isn't it? You go to the pub and you end up hanging out with loads of people. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, how cool is this? You can make friends so fast here. And we were totally drawn to it and we loved it, didn't we? But since we have lived regionally, I don't know if I could live there now.
Yeah, it is tough. I mean, that's the thing. And if there are a lot of things you forego, and but it is tough. It's a tough choice.
I think you have to think about what is actually around that town as well. Like with Bellingen, all you've got is really Coffs Harbour. Now, Coffs Harbour, apart from Big Banana,
actually.
What is there? Big Banana. There are some actually.
There's other big stuff nearby.
Kind of a few good beaches in Coffs. That's about as much as I can tell you about Coffs. It isn't that amazing as what other
Speak for yourself. There are some nice beaches there, and it's
but is it your main major place you want to be near to?
Well,
really,
I mean, that's why we chose here because logically it's close to the city and stuff. And so, being down in like Melbourne, you probably think like Yarra Valley is probably going to be like, Ace, and then you need the city and that sort of thing. And, it's not too far to go. So there, maybe I don't know the equivalent in Adelaide, but I'm sure, Adelaide Hills is, I don't know how far the Adelaide Hills from
I don't know. I've only been to Adelaide once.
Yeah, we need to kind of drop. We went there for New Year's. I was very unwell because I left the esky open and it kind of like, the water. No, I left some food open, and the water from the esky got into the food and made the food go funny. And it was I was so
quick
ill.
One on that. We did a road trip from Sydney to Adelaide. We got to Adelaide. Bear in mind, this is when we lived in Kirribilli, opposite the Sydney Harbour Bridge. We drove all the way to Adelaide
Yes, Miss Moneypenny.
We drove all the way to Adelaide for New Year's Eve. We turned up to it felt like a very spooky Airbnb. We turned up to it. Steve was so ill, he couldn't move. And I had to sit there with a bottle of wine watching the New Year's Eve fireworks in Sydney in this place in Adelaide.
And I was ill and I was sure the place was spooked out. I was like, there's spooky things in here. I just do not like it. I'm not going to sleep a wink. It just didn't feel right. Anyway, so that was not a good New Year's. I'm going to get shivers thinking about it.
But yeah, so that's why we ended up moving to Sunshine Coast, because a great thing about Southeast Queensland is that you've got access to so many things all in one sort of space. So for us, we're an hour and a half from Brisbane, 2 hours from Gold Coast, 3 hours from Byron Bay. we're 40 minutes from Noosa. In just that area itself, there's so much to do. It's pretty incredible, and it's an amazing spot to live as well.
Yeah, look, I think all this region's amazing. Like, Gold Coast, all Byron Bay up to Sunny Coast is amazing. And so I think, wherever you're choosing to go, obviously work comes into this. I mean, we're quite lucky because we can, have because we work remotely, we have the ability to kind of choose.
Live anywhere.
Totally feel for people out there who don't have that choice, because not everyone has that choice. So I think, really have a good think about where you want to be. I mean, skills are transferable outside big cities. So have a really good think about, where your particular skills could be utilized outside of a big city. You might have even thought of, like, if I go out to Bathurst, maybe they need, a refrigeration engineer or something. I can't even think of something. I don't know. But there could be 100 different skills that they need out there that you don't really instantly think that that's useful. So, I think food for thought.
And it's an interesting one, because one of our followers sent us a message yesterday, and they said that they're in a situation where, they're living in Sydney. They've been living there for a long time. They've already got the circle of friends. They've got the kids there, but their family are back home in Ireland. They're at a stage where they're like, what do they do? Because buying a house in the eastern suburbs is pretty much near to impossible unless you're earning a lot of money. So that in itself is like,
look,
do they have to move out of the city to then start all over again and move the kids out of school?
I think,
or do they move back
eventually
home?
one day I'll
there's
get
so
there
many questions that come with it. So I think when you are thinking about where to live, it's like you have to sort of really consider everything around you as well, in terms of maybe a bit more for the long term as well. Like Steve said, we're super lucky that we work remotely, but at the same time, it's kind of crippling as well, because that power of choice is like, well, what do we do? Do we stay here? Do we go? Where do we go from there? And we have looked at a lot of towns up and down the East Coast. I think I might just share a couple of them with you that we were thinking of moving to, just because it's kind of fun in a way. So first of all, Southern Highlands, to south of Sydney. I love that area because it really reminds me of England. It's got, I don't know why, it's just got this real English feel to it. And I really love it down there. There's a lot to do. One thing I did do though, when I was looking at all these places, is I joined all the Facebook community groups.
Which might be a bad thing because you end up seeing
I think it's a good thing to do because then you ask everybody and you go, well, and I asked everybody and I said, well, what do you love and what do you hate about here? Obviously, this is during that sort of COVID time and everyone's saying, well, we're getting kicked out of our town because all the city people are coming in, and you're like, oh, I don't want to be one of those people that you're automatically going to judge and hate.
I think, but just bear in mind, filter out the squeaky wheels because, there's obviously keyboard warriors out there on those Facebook groups who just love to be noisy. There's some noisy peeps. Filter them out, and I think you'll see the kind of what's going on. But yeah, I think every town's got one of those keyboard warriors.
Oh yeah, I mean Agnes, God, they were awful, and I'd always say like, who are these people?
Who are these people?
Because everyone's so nice, and they were like, if you even like spelt the name of that town wrong, because a lot of people call it Agnes Waters. I don't know why, but that's not what it is. Everyone would go bananas, and it's like, wow, okay. So that's what I did, was I looked at loads of Facebook groups and asked them those questions. Other places we have considered, I really love Mount Wilson up in Blue Mountains. Love it there. But when we actually had a look at a place to get married, and there was a girl who was like looking after this beautiful house, she did say, she went, everybody thinks I live in paradise here, but it's actually really boring because I am like a 40-minute drive to the shops. And I was like, oh. And that really reminded me of some friends that we met when we were traveling around the Maldives. Just a side note here, if you didn't know, you can backpack around the Maldives, which is what we did a few years ago. We did some scuba diving there with a couple, and there's an English girl who's married to a Maldivian guy. And we were like, wow, you live in the most beautiful place in the whole world. And she went, I live in an island. And if I get off this island, I'm going to another island or to another island in this country. There's no escaping it. And we were like, oh, never looked at it like that.
Perpetually stuck in island.
Makes you look at that sort of lifestyle very differently when you're like, oh yeah, actually, is this what I really want?
So can I have a crack at mine? my top picks then?
Yeah, I hadn't even finished, but go ahead.
Well, I'm going to throw one out there, and I'm not like, this is a totally not a regional thing. I'm going to say Melbourne. Yeah,
great point, Steve. You know why?
Why is that?
Because when you go from regional back to the city, there's so many things you have to think about, because we have considered Melbourne a lot. And it's like, when we went down there recently, we were kind of like, do I want to go back into an apartment after living in a house? Do I want to do that? And you have to really weigh those things up.
Yeah, well, that's totally. I mean, living in the city, yeah, you're going to be paying big rents to live in anything that's kind of big. So matches the size of the house, right? But, that said, I think Melbourne has a nice mix of cool people, cool things to do, lots happening, all that sort of stuff that is, super exciting. And, culture, you've got loads to do in the area. You've got Mornington Peninsula, which is another thought as well. Mornington Peninsula is amazing. So I would even think down there might be cool, because then you're not too far from the city as well. So there's another thought. And if you want to go the other side of Melbourne, you could go down towards there's a Bells Beach around there, but that's kind of a bit more of a drive if you're going to do something regionally. That sort of Bells Beachy area is super nice. But yeah, I think Melbourne's pretty cool. And my second pick would probably be Bellingen.
Oh, as we did talk
number
about.
two. We did talk about Bellingen's super cool. Tiny little town. There's not a lot there, but it's just super nice. And there's something that Annie and I feel a big affinity for. We really love it there.
I think if we ever get to the point where we are content with living in a place where we don't feel like we need to go off and go on adventures, that would be the perfect place.
Number 3 is Atherton Tablelands.
Oh, yes. I love that one.
It's next to Cairns, or not far from Cairns, hour and a half drive or so, which kind of fits that city thing where, you're kind of like, oh, cool, not too far from the city, so it's big enough to have its own infrastructure. But, it's still rolling hills, and it's little sort of country towns and that sort of thing, that it's just super nice. And you've got some amazing things up there, like these big crater lakes and walks to go on and waterfalls.
It's
and
really beautiful.
Interesting things to see. And, yeah, it's really nice. Great food, great people. That's super cool. And I think you've got access to all that sort of northern Queensland tropical thing going on. If I wasn't to do that, we weren't around this area, I'd maybe if you can consider somewhere like a bit further, sort of south. But we haven't really talked about like Adelaide and Western Australia. How do you feel about those, Annie? How do you feel about those parts?
You know what? I've only been to Perth once with you, and that was quite a while ago. But I did travel through WA when I was a backpacker, but that's going back like nearly 20 years ago. I think of Perth, I think, oh my God, it's the most isolated city in the world. That's kind of a bit much for me, maybe, just to even consider that. But WA does have really the best beaches in Australia that I've ever seen. They are unbelievable, like beautiful.
Yeah, I think Margaret River, that sort of area, is the place to go if you're into pristine sort of environments and that sort of thing, sort of farm meets sea type thing. That's wineries, that sort of vibe. That sounds pretty good to me. I like that idea. It
is nice, Margaret River, even though I did actually work on the wineries there, which wasn't a very nice experience, but the town itself was pretty nice. Is there anywhere else you would consider, Steve? I mean, obviously Agnes Water, very, very beautiful town. It's just if you're happy to get literally stripped back all those sort of luxury. I mean, they're not even luxuries, are they? Just necessities, really. Then you're going to love it.
Yeah. I think, another choice is here where we are right now. So it's not too bad. So, there are a lot of choices out there. I think more than anything, like just find your peeps, find where they are. Like go and just go and travel around and have a look anyway before you make your big decision. I mean, and I think just as I say, think outside the box with whatever your profession is, and you don't necessarily have to maintain the same thing. Just find some transferable skills and remarket yourself, repackage yourself to something else, because there's always something you can find that's useful in a new area.
So we're going to give you some tips for how to feel settled as an expat. And this is just some of the stuff we've learned as well. Think about what it is that's making you feel unsettled at the moment, because lots of us are feeling unsettled all the time. I mean, I do feel like Australia's my home, but it's always going to take me a long time to really feel like, is this where I actually really belong? Is this where we belong? Who knows? Who knows what the future really holds? Think about if you have got any friends. Is a job that you really love? Do you feel connected to the area you live in? I mean, is it actually making you happy? Like we said, We love living in Sunshine Coast. We haven't really made any friends yet because we haven't actually even made an attempt to. But I know that they are here waiting for us, aren't they?
Yeah, and but on the flip side, I'll add a counter to that is that a wise podcast person who was on our podcast, another podcaster, had a really wise quote that wherever you go, there you are. And I think I think I mentioned that earlier, but it stuck with me. It's bouncing around, a bit of an earworm.
Was that Emma
There was.
Broke Generation?
From Broke Generation, that's correct. And her really good piece of advice was that, maybe the change is in you. So also worth looking at yourself to sort of understand your own kind of bits and pieces that, maybe you're searching for something outside that's really within. But if that's not the case and you're like Annie and I, where you're just, that's just who you are, well, then that's totally fine too. It's totally fine to not feel like you're, supposed to belong here. That's my place. Well, everyone's different. There's no kind of real kind of spot where you might fit in. It's just the way life is. And I think we should always be happy with that. That's totally fine. I think it is. And there's no point putting a square peg in a round hole. That's what I think.
Absolutely. Oh, you know what I do when I feel homesick and I start to question it and I go, should we move back? Like, should we go and do something new or different? You know what I do? I go on to, I think it's called Rightmove in the UK, which is just like Domain or real estate over here, which is just like housing rental website. And I start to have a look at the rentals over there. And for me, that helps me visualize, can I actually see myself doing that? Like, do I really want to do that?
And he does daydream a bit. She'll be like, oh, look at this rental, Steve. It's amazing. It's like this cottage in the countryside.
Well, that's the thing. We watch, what's it called? Escape to the Country a lot. We're like, oh, isn't it lovely? And they always show it, in summertime with a nice light.
They never show you the 9 months of perpetual rain and sleet and icy roads and everything. They don't show you that. It's never filmed in the winter. It doesn't exist in winter. The show doesn't happen in winter. Mm-hmm. It's a summer show.
Well, that's the thing. You got to realistically think about it. If you're feeling like, oh, I really want to go back home, I'm really missing it, I need more than just the beach and the weather here. Realistically, I'm just going to let you guys know now, you're probably already aware of this, but when you start looking at rentals in England, they're not that great for what you get for your money.
Yeah, I mean, and it costs things are going up in, to extortionate prices everywhere for everything. So, pop on your power bills and everything onto the rent, and it's just going to be a pretty heavy duty price tag to live in that nice little country cottage, right?
Yeah, and it's a great wake up call because then I go, yeah. Now I know what it's like to live here. I mean, where we live, we're super lucky. We're renting, but we live in a house. And I think if we try to match that in the UK, we'd probably have to spend like an extra £1,000 to get something like this, really, a month, which is like a lot. So it makes me really, really appreciate where we're living. And I know sometimes, when you sort of think about the buzz in England compared to the buzz in Australia, especially for us, it can feel a bit boring at times. I'm going to admit that. And it's true because if you're used to, the lifestyle in England compared to here, it is different. And it just made me think, gosh, if we lived in England, wouldn't it be lovely to zip off to Italy for like a few days and weighing up those pros and cons of everyday life?
We said that last time we were there. And how many times did we do that? How many times?
We did it once.
Once.
But that's only because we went to Croatia and it was so expensive.
It was crazy expensive. And I can guarantee you'll be very expensive.
Some of our friends are traveling a bit at the moment. Looks like everywhere's really expensive now. Yeah. So, yeah, basically, we'll just take that one off the dream list.
So, there's, all those sort of little things, your little fantasy moments you had in your head, it's kind of like, is that really going to happen?
Yeah. And as we spoke to Amy in our last episode, we talked a lot about that sort of expat guilt situation. And, in that conversation, we did talk about that experience that actually our other podcast episode that we had with a county down under is going through, considering she's moved back to Ireland and she's sort of seeing it as she's moved back for a year. And I just feel like if we all treated our lives as an expat as a sort of short-lived experience, would we look at it sort of in different eyes? Brilliant
way to, analyze that. I think if we did, I think we'd all live better.
Wouldn't
I really
we?
do.
Why would we be miserable when we're living in an amazing place for?
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, you know, obviously there's probably a lot of people who might be listening to this going, yeah, right, well, I'm set here for life now and I can't do anything about it because I've got children who are settled or like I've got to be here for the next 5 years or 10 years. And to me, that seems like a really long time. But it doesn't really matter how long you're here for. I feel like everybody should be living their lives the best they can each day and really appreciating each day that we have because no one knows what's going to happen. You can walk down the road and bam, you know, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. You should be really living life as the best you can and be kind to people, be nice to people, help people, all that sort of stuff because life's too short. It honestly is. I know it sounds like a really, you know, catchy thing that we're throwing out, but honestly, you'll actually feel better if you help people. It's like almost a selfish thing. Think of about it in a selfish way. I want to feel better. I'm going to go and help you. I'm going to feel good about it, you know? So yeah, go and help.
Go and help people.
Peeps.
And I do feel like that there are certain moments in our lives that come around where we go, oh gosh, I've got to make a really big decision here. Which way are we going to go? Which path are we going to take? That's going to really determine our immediate future. And that's one thing we had to do with Agnes Water in a sense.
Can I just say flipping a coin helps you make the decision? It really does because you'll watch your own mind at the result. So you'll be like, heads or tails, let's, you know, whatever it'll be, let's do it. And then you flip it and then you land and it goes, oh, it's heads. I feel so bad about that now. I wish it was the other one. And you go, oh, that's what I need to do. I don't need to flip the coin. I just need to go do that. And that's happened to me so many times when I've been like, you know, traveling around the place and I don't know what to do next. I'll literally flip the coin and I won't even pick what's on the coin. It's just that it's clear in my mind from that point which way I should go.
Oh, there you go. So, but you know, when we were deciding about Agnes Water was the place where we felt the most settled anywhere, isn't it? Like we loved it there. We had friends there. It was a really easy life living there. Now, you know, we weren't happy all the time we were there. Like a lot of the time we were like, oh my God, we need to get out of here because we need to like be back to life again. But at the same time, making that decision to leave was really, really, really difficult. And when we went back last weekend, I did get a sense of grief, like being there and leaving there because I felt like, oh my God, I gave up that. That was so nice. But when you get presented with these opportunities in your life, it's like you either take them or you don't.
Yeah. I reckon you should grab it. Any opportunity that comes your way, grab it with both hands. And you know what? It's okay if it doesn't work out. It's totally fine. You know, fail fast. Start something else new afterwards and go do the next thing because that's the way life is. That, you know, some things work, some things don't. But the most important thing is that you're engaged and that you're doing things and like moving in a direction. That's the super important part. Be hungry for being right and being on the right, feeling like you're on the right path within yourself. I think that's the critical moment or the critical thing to take away from that is just feel like that you're on a path to somewhere. And, you know, I think, you know, roll with the punches and be cool. There you go. Cool. That's Steve's advice. Be cool.
And think about all the things you can learn as an expat as well. I'm sure all of us have changed drastically since we probably left our home countries, since moving abroad, and it can only really do good for you, really.
Yeah. And life, just one last thing, life is truly like an adventure. It's not meant to be like, you know, it is a choose your own adventure. It's not meant to be a story where you read the end of it and you read the middle of it and then kind of, you know what's coming. That'd be super boring, right? You don't have to live like that. You know, live your dreams, all the rest of it. I'm just going way too far now.
I think that's pretty good, Steve. That's Steve's morality boost of the day. And
fist bumps. Woo.
Yay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I hope this episode has inspired you in some way and really helped to reassure you that it's okay. And enjoy your life as an expat.
And don't forget to like and subscribe, leave us a review, and we will love you all the more. Tell everyone, tell your friends, tell your neighbours, tell the cat, just tell anyone you can. Tell them how amazing this show is. And if you loved us, tell them even more. Anyway, take care, be good to one another, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.